The origin of Cain's wife. Where did Cain get his wife? The story of Cain and his wife is one of the most fascinating mysteries in the Bible. It has puzzled readers, theologians, and scholars alike for thousands of years. If Adam and Eve were the first humans, and Cain killed his brother Abel, where did Cain find a wife? It's a question that forces us to reconsider everything we think we know about the Bible's earliest stories. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into this ancient mystery, exploring both biblical texts and the surrounding historical context. Could it be that the answer has been hiding in plain sight all along? Let's start at the beginning. After Cain killed Abel, he was cursed by God and driven away from his family. He was condemned to wander as a fugitive. But in a twist that catches many readers by surprise, Cain found a wife. Genesis 4 verse 17 tells us, Cain made love to his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. But where did she come from? The Bible doesn't seem to mention any other women besides Eve at this point in the narrative. Did God create more people that aren't mentioned in Genesis? Did Cain marry his sister? Or is there something more to this story? As we explore these questions, we'll uncover the deeper meaning behind the text and see how it has been interpreted throughout history. So, if you've ever wondered where Cain got his wife, stick around, because we're about to unravel one of the Bible's greatest mysteries. After Cain's terrible crime of murdering his brother, God declared a curse over him. In Genesis 4 verses 11 to 12, God says to Cain, Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. This curse was severe. Not only was Cain banished from his family, but the very earth that he worked, the ground that sustained him, was cursed. No longer would the soil produce crops for him. His life of farming was over. Cain was doomed to wander the earth in exile. Cain's reaction was immediate. He cried out in fear, saying in Genesis 4 verses 13 to 14, My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. Here, Cain expresses two fears: the fear of losing God's presence and the fear that someone would seek revenge for Abel's death. But who exactly did Cain fear? If Adam, Eve, and their children were the only people on earth at the time, who would Cain be worried about? This raises the question of whether there were other people, perhaps other descendants of Adam and Eve, or even separate groups created by God. Despite Cain's crime, God showed mercy. He placed a mark on Cain, a sign that would protect him from harm. In Genesis 4 verse 15, God says, Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over. With this mark of protection, Cain was able to leave his family and journey to the land of Nod, east of Eden. This sets the stage for the next mystery. Cain's wife. After leaving his family and settling in Nod, we are told that Cain had a wife and children. But how? Where did she come from? There are 2 main theories about where Cain's wife came from, and each of them has sparked considerable debate among theologians and biblical scholars. Theory 1, God created other people. The first theory suggests that God may have created additional groups of people outside of Adam and Eve. This idea stems from Cain's fear of being killed by others after he was cursed. If Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel were the only people on earth, who could Cain possibly be afraid of? This has led some scholars to propose that there may have been other humans in the world that aren't explicitly mentioned in the Bible. According to this theory, God could have created other people in different parts of the world, and Cain's wife may have come from one of these groups. However, there's a major problem with this theory. Genesis 3 verse 20 clearly states that Eve is the mother of all the living. If Eve is the mother of all humanity, then it seems unlikely that there were other, separate groups of people created by God. The Bible gives no indication that anyone else was created apart from Adam and Eve, and this theory contradicts the idea that all humans descended from this original pair. Theory 2. Cain married his sister. The second and more widely accepted theory is that Cain married a close relative. likely one of his sisters. The Bible tells us that Adam and Eve had many children, although not all of them are mentioned by name. Genesis 5 verse 4 says, "After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters." Given that Adam and Eve were the first humans and that all people descended from them, it's reasonable to conclude that Cain's wife was one of his sister's nieces or a more distant relative. While this idea may seem strange to us today, it was not considered unusual in the early days of humanity. At that time, God had not yet given the laws that later prohibited close relatives from marrying. In fact, the Book of Jubilees, a Jewish commentary written between 135 and 105 BC, specifically mentions that Cain's wife was his sister, Awan. According to this text, Cain married Awan, and she bore him a son named Enoch. This fits with the biblical account, which says that Cain had a son named Enoch and built a city in his honor. It's also important to remember that the human population was very small in the beginning. Adam and Eve were the first people, and their children had no choice but to marry each other. This continued for several generations until the human population grew large enough to make inter-family marriages unnecessary. Later, when the population had grown, God gave laws to the Israelites that forbade incest. Many early Christian thinkers also grapple with the question of Cain's wife. For example, St. Augustine, one of the most influential theologians in Christian history, believed that Cain's wife must have been a relative, likely one of Adam and Eve's daughters. Augustine argued that in the early days of humanity, it was not sinful for close relatives to marry because the human race was just beginning to multiply. He believed that these early marriages were necessary for the survival of the human race. Other early Christian writers, such as Origen and John Chrysostom, also accepted the idea that Cain's wife was his sister. They saw this as part of God's plan to populate the earth and argued that the prohibition against incest came much later, as human society developed. In modern times, biblical scholars continue to study this question, offering various interpretations based on linguistic analysis, historical context, and theological insights. Some scholars suggest that the story of Cain's wife may be a symbolic narrative, representing the spread of humanity and the founding of early civilizations. From a genetic perspective, scientists point out that in the early stages of human history, genetic diversity was much greater than it is today. This means that the risk of genetic problems from close relative marriages would have been much lower than it is now. As the human population grew and genetic diversity increased, the need for inter-family marriages disappeared. Ultimately, while the Bible doesn't provide a detailed account of Cain's wife, it's clear that she was a descendant of Adam and Eve. Whether she was Cain's sister, niece, or a more distant relative, her presence is crucial to the continuation of humanity. Beyond the literal question of where Cain's wife came from, there are important spiritual lessons we can learn from Cain's story. At its core, the story of Cain and Abel is a story about sin, justice, and mercy. Cain's murder of Abel represents the first instance of human sin outside of the Garden of Eden. This act of violence shattered the peace of the first family and introduced a cycle of sin that would continue throughout human history. But even in the midst of this tragedy, God's mercy shines through. Despite Cain's terrible crime, God did not destroy him. Instead, he placed a mark on Cain to protect him from harm. This mark represents God's mercy and his desire to give Cain a chance to repent and continue his life, even though he had committed a grave sin. This theme of mercy continues throughout the Bible. Time and again, we see that while God punishes sin, he also offers forgiveness and redemption. Cain's story reminds us that no matter how far we fall, God is always ready to offer us another chance. Even in exile, Cain was able to build a family and establish a legacy. The story of Cain's wife also teaches us about the importance of family and community. Despite his crime, Cain's wife chose to stay with him and build a life together. Their son Enoch became the founder of a city, continuing the legacy of human civilization. This reminds us that, even in the face of sin and suffering, life continues. Families grow, communities form, and God's plan for humanity moves forward. Interestingly, the story of Cain has parallels in other ancient cultures. In Mesopotamian mythology, for example, there are stories of exiled individuals who, like Cain, were cast out for their sins but went on to establish cities and civilizations. Similarly, in ancient Sumerian myths, we find tales of gods who punish humans for their misdeeds only to later protect them from harm. These myths often emphasize the themes of divine justice and mercy, much like the story of Cain in the Bible. While these stories come from different cultures and traditions, they share common themes that resonate with the human experience: the consequences of sin, the importance of family, and the hope of redemption. As we come to the end of this exploration, we're left with a profound sense of mystery and wonder. Where did Cain's wife come from? While the Bible doesn't provide a clear answer, the evidence points to Cain marrying a close relative, likely one of his sisters. In the early days of humanity, such marriages were necessary for the survival of the human race. But beyond the question of Cain's wife, we've seen that this story offers important spiritual lessons. It reminds us of the consequences of sin, the power of God's mercy, and the enduring strength of family and community. As we reflect on this story, let's remember that no matter how far we fall, God is always ready to offer us another chance. Just as he protected Cain, he offers us protection, mercy, and the hope of redemption. If you found this video enlightening, be sure to give it a like, share it with your friends, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into biblical mysteries and spiritual lessons. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.